3 by my watch, so I think I'll get started. First of all, welcome to the Royal Armouries. My name's Mike, I'm part of the live interpretation team at the museum. It's my job to bring this place to life a little bit, and what I thought I'd do to round the day off is talk about a few firearms. Now, some of the questions we get asked here at the museum go along the lines of, what gun is this? Why is this gun better than this one? How does it work? Why do we use that and not this? These are all great questions, but they're big questions to answer. But I'm going to try my best. I'm going to show you how firearm technology has changed through the years as far as the British Armed Forces are concerned. Now, that's still quite a big topic, so I'm not going to try and cover all of that. Instead, I'm going to look at the major advancements in firearm technology as far as standard issue weapons are concerned. So I'm not going to look at specialist troops or experimental weapons. I'm just going to be looking at the kind of firearms that everyone would have been trained to use had they joined the army at certain points in time. With that in mind, these 3 firearms are genuine. They're real weapons. They're over 100 years old now. They may have been used in anger, we're not sure, but I can tell you they have been deactivated. They don't work anymore. These 2 are replicas. They're not real, they never have been, but they're made using the same materials, they're the same weight and the same size as the originals. In short, none of these 5 firearms can go bang. They might go click, but they're not going to go bang. If they do go bang, I'll be as shocked as you are, and I'll probably lose my job. So let's hope that doesn't happen. Now, before I talk about British firearms, I should really tell you where firearm technology comes from in the first place. And for that, we have to travel all the way to China in the 9th century AD. Now, during this time, Chinese alchemists are trying to create something called the elixir of life, a substance which, when consumed, will either prolong your life or maybe even make you immortal. Instead of creating the elixir of life, however, they stumble upon the recipe for gunpowder, which you could argue is the opposite to what they're trying to achieve. Now, very early on in Chinese history, you see early cannon being used, firearms being used, things called fire lancers, which are basically flamethrowers, being used by the military. Over time, the recipe for gunpowder migrates out of China and spreads across the entire world. Now, here in Europe, we see the first recorded use of gunpowder weaponry being used in the 14th century, so the 1300s. Now, this really comes in the form of cannon, massive barrels essentially that you stuff full of gunpowder, stick a boulder in it, you aim it at a castle or a city, and you ignite the powder with the aim of battering down those defences. If you can make big cannon though, people start to think, well, why not make little ones as well? So we create the hand cannon, the first European handheld firearm. It's just a simple metal tube that you stuff full of gunpowder, you put a simple projectile down it, and you aim it at a person you don't like. These were unreliable, they were dangerous to use because they could explode, but it's not really a standard issue weapon, which is why I don't have one to show you. There is no standard weapon in a medieval army, and people didn't know how to use these hand cannons effectively. By the time we get to the 1600s, however, times have changed. Tactics have moved on. During the English Civil Wars, we have the new model army being formed under Oliver Cromwell. This was the first standing army, really, in this country. With the first standing army, you get the first standard weapons, and firearms are one of those weapons. Now, the firearm I've got to show you first is the matchlock musket, a common weapon used throughout the English Civil War by both sides, the Royalists and the Parliamentarians. As far as how you load it is concerned, the first thing you have to do is open your pan. Your pan being this little shelf with a depression on the outside of your weapon. You pour a small amount of gunpowder into that depression and you cover it over. You then charge your musket by pouring more powder directly down the barrel. You follow that with your musket ball, which is a simple ball of lead. Nothing fancy about it. Drop that down the barrel as well. And to form an airtight seal, you stuff some wadding down. That can either be fabric or paper, doesn't really matter what. Now, to ensure everything burns efficiently, all that powder needs to be compacted down at this end. And to do that, you remove your scouring stick and you ram the charge home. So you're literally pushing everything down the barrel in order to make sure it burns efficiently. Okay? And this is just for one shot. Pull that out, put it back where you found it, and you're almost good to go. Now, being a matchlock musket, you would have a burning match, which looks a bit like this. It's a thin piece of rope or a thick piece of string, depending on how you want to look at it. It's been soaked in saltpeter, so it burns relatively slowly. It'll be a lot longer than this, probably burning at both ends, alright? That's going to be wrapped around your left hand, maybe even wrapped around the barrel of your musket itself. You draw the match out and you place it between the jaws of this little serpent's head just here. Once again, this is still just for one shot. You blow on the match to ensure it's nice and hot. You test it to make sure it's going to go where you want it to go. You present, open your pan, and you give fire. And when you give fire, you squeeze and hold that trigger down. And you can see you're dunking that burning match directly into the powder on the outside of your weapon. Now there should be an explosion that goes off to the right. That's called a flash in the pan. But some of it will also go through a tiny hole drilled inside called a touch hole. That will ignite your main charge of powder. So really there are two explosions you're waiting for. Flash in the pan, that main charge going on. So your weapon goes bang for your second shot. You place the musket on the ground, blow down it to ensure there are no burning embers down the barrel, and you repeat the whole process. That's going to take you about a minute, maybe two, a minute, maybe 30 seconds. So you're looking at 1 or 2 shots a minute, which by modern standards isn't very good, but for a barrel loading weapon, a muzzle loading weapon, it's okay. It's simple to do, but there are some issues with it. First of all, it's unreliable. Having a burning match exposed to the elements means that if it's windy, that match might go out. If it's raining, it could extinguish. As soon as you expose your powder, if you do that too early, if it's windy, it blows off. If it's raining, it could absorb moisture, stopping it from igniting. And then there's the dangerous side to this particular firearm. As a musketeer, you've got 13 charges of gunpowder strapped to your body on a burning match. If you're being careless and you bring that match too close to you, there's a good chance you blow yourself up. And that's a mistake you only ever make once. And then, if that's not enough to put you off, there's the potential for delay. The delay between the flash in the pan and the weapon firing, and the delay between you squeezing the trigger and the flash in the pan. Okay, now, to be clear, I have fired these weapons as part of displays here at the Royal Armouries, and 9 times out of 10, you expose the powder, you aim, squeeze the trigger, and it goes off instantly. 9 times out of 10. Sometimes, however, when I've done this, I squeeze the trigger, and nothing happens. And you've got to wait. And you've got to wait. Sometimes it goes off. Sometimes it doesn't. And you've got to pour a bit more powder on there, make sure your match is nice and hot. The worst one is when you squeeze the trigger, you see a flash in the pan, but your weapon doesn't go off. And that's fine during a display, alright? You're stood in front of an audience, much like yourself, you see the flash in the pan, you've got to wait, and you feel silly. You feel like a lemon just stood in front of a bunch of people. But imagine that you are a soldier halfway through a fight, alright? You're aiming, everyone else is aiming their muskets, you squeeze the trigger, most musketeers would close their eyes and face away so they don't blind themselves and burn their face, and you hear this almighty explosion. Everyone's weapons fired. You feel the heat of the flash in the pan against your cheeks. So surely, your weapon's fired as well, right? Put it down, and you need to make sure there are no burning embers in it. Boom. And then it goes off. It didn't happen often, but there is a chance that you could hurt yourself, maybe kill yourself or someone else when this weapon discharged when you weren't quite expecting it. Clearly, it's not the best weapon you can ever get your hands on. Now, there are lots of different things you can improve on with the matchlock. I think the biggest issue with the matchlock musket is the reliability. You want something to fire when you squeeze the trigger. Now during this time there are other mechanisms available. You've got the wheellock, but that's quite expensive and fiddly. But you've also got the flintlock knocking around. Now that's also relatively expensive, so your average musketeer doesn't get hold of it. But by the time we get to the early 1700s, that's changed. So your average soldier, by the 1700s, is going to be using something more like this. Now this is a flintlock musket, and it has a fantastic name, a name I'm hoping you'll all remember by the time you go home today. This weapon is called the King George III Longland Pattern Smoothbore Flintlock Musket. Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? King George III, long land pattern, smoothbore, flintlock musket. Thing is, this is the long land pattern. Depending on when you join the army, you might be given the short land pattern, the India pattern, the Tower pattern, the Navy pattern. Lots of different versions of essentially the same gun. So most people refer to it by its nickname, Brown Bess. So this is your Brown Bess musket. Now it works in much the same way as your matchlock, a few differences. The big difference is the beginning. You pull this hammer to half cock, which is your safety, pour powder in the pan, cover it over, everything goes down the barrel. Another change is the fact you don't have charges of powder strapped to you anymore, instead you're using paper cartridges. So this cartridge contains everything you need for a shot, so you rip the top off with your teeth, powder in the pan, and then stuff the rest of it down the barrel. You still ran the charge home, that hasn't changed, but this time you pull your hammer to full cock and you're ready to go. And what should happen when I squeeze the trigger is this hammer will lunge forward. Now between the jaws of this hammer is a piece of flint. That flint should strike this bit of steel sticking up for a frism. The friction between the flint and the steel should create a spark, whilst the impact should flip the pan cover open. The spark rolls down the prism into the pan, that ignites the powder, flash in the pan, whole thing goes bang. That's what should happen. Obviously there's no powder in here, but I do have a flint, so let's see if this works, shall we? Keep your eye on this part of the weapon. Nope, no spark. And that's because we haven't looked after our flint properly. If you don't maintain your flint, you're not going to get a spark. We can get away with it because we're not actually shooting it, but in a battlefield situation, you want it to work. At the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, 1 in 5 of the Indian pattern versions of these muskets misfired on that first attempt. Yes, it needs to have another go, you just pull the hammer back, fiddle with the flint, maybe put some more powder in. But it is, believe it or not, more reliable in bad weather. It's going to fire more often than not. Now, as far as the stats go, to be honest, it's very similar to your matchlock musket. Now, imagine 100 years ago, you've got an effective range of 75 yards, 2 shots a minute with this weapon. Moving on about 100 years, 3 shots a minute. That's a good improvement over 100 years. Effective at 100 yards. So in 100 years, we've improved by 1 shot a minute, and we've increased its effectiveness by 25 yards. That's pretty good going, isn't it, really? Still not perfect, though. How can we improve these flintlock muskets? Well, there are lots of things you can do, really. It's still not as reliable, it's still slow to fire, and it's still not effective at any great range. Now, the weapon I've got to show you next makes its appearance in the mid-part of the 1800s. So if you imagine this makes its first appearance in the 1700s, about 150 years later, we're starting to see weapons like this on the battlefield. Now this is the P53, or the pattern 1853 Enfield rifle. And that's the important word, rifle. It's one of the first standard issue rifles given to British troops. Now if you're not sure what a rifle is, it's really simple. A musket has a smooth barrel, alright? There's nothing fancy about these tubes, it's just a plain old boring tube. A rifle, on the other hand, has a number of grooves carved along the interior of the barrel. These grooves kind of twist like a corkscrew, if you like, and what should happen, if your projectile follows those grooves, it will start to spin. And because it's spinning, it will travel in a straight line, it will travel much further. A whole bunch of physics reasons I don't understand, alright? Rifles are not new by the time we get to the 1800s. Rifles have been around for a long time. Henry VIII had riflemen in his bodyguard. The problem people always had was getting the rifle to work, and getting them to work quickly. See, the British expect 3 shots a minute. Doesn't sound like a lot, I know, but that's what's expected of its infantry at this time. To get a rifle to work, now bear with me on this, to get a rifle to work, your projectile has to be bigger than the tube is trying to fit down. Otherwise, there's no guarantee it's going to scrape down those grooves. Alright? That's how it works. But how can you get a projectile that's too big to go into your barrel, into the barrel? It doesn't work. We've all played those games as kids, haven't you, where you've got a square hole and you've got a triangle and you can't fit that shape in. We've all done it, or at least some of us more successfully than others. If something's too big, it won't go in. Now, at the Battle of Waterloo, 1815, there were riflemen around. They had the Baker rifle, and they had an ingenious way of getting around this problem. They gave you a hammer, and those riflemen were asked to physically hammer the projectile down the barrel. It works, but it's slow. They can only do 2 shots a minute. That's not good enough for your average infantryman. With the P53, they get around it by changing the projectile. All right? We are moving away from plain old boring musket balls, and we're using something a bit more like this. Now, this is a French invention called the Minier round. Now, the first thing you notice is the shape. It's conical shape. It's bullet shaped. I should point out, though, because it's French, any English speaker refuses to pronounce the word correctly. So it's not the Minier round. If you're an English speaker, it's the mini round, or the mini ball. I don't know why they call it mini ball. There you go. So, conical shape, aerodynamic. It flies through the air nice and easily, cuts through the air. That's not the important thing. The important thing is the back. There's a big old dent in this round. Could be a wooden plug in there as well. There's a big old dent in the Minier round. Now this would drop down the barrel of the P53 nice and easily. It's nice and small. But when you fire the weapon, the heat from the explosion makes the lead more malleable. It's softer. It's easier to deform. The explosion would take the dent, which looks like this, and suddenly it balloons it out. It makes it bigger. That skirt that it's just created will scrape down the rifling. Because it's spinning, it will travel further in a straight line. With the addition of rifling and the Minier round, the P53 is effective up to 800 yards. That's significantly better than 100 yards. Because that drops down nice and easily, it's still 3 shots a minute. We've also got another improvement, the mechanism itself. If you have a look at this end, it looks a lot more simple and boring in comparison to your flintlock, and that's because we got rid of the flint altogether. Instead, we use something called a percussion cap. A percussion cap looks like a little brass top hat, and it's full of a chemical called mercury fulminate, a shock-sensitive explosive. Now, when you pull your hammer to half cock, you take that little cap and you place it directly over the touch hole. Everything goes down the barrel, pull your hammer all the way back, aim and fire. Bang! That's your short, sharp shot. There's no longer a flash in the pan. It forms an airtight seal, so all that explosion goes into the barrel. It fires instantly. No delay, and it's much better in poor weather. Now, all of these improvements get gun designers thinking. We've improved its reliability, we've improved its accuracy and range, but it's still slow to fire. And that's because we're still pushing everything down the barrel. If we can load it at this end somehow, it will be a lot quicker. By the time we get to the end of the 1800s, so 1870s, we're using weapons like this. Now this is the Martini Henry, and it's a breech-loading rifle. Breech-loading means it's not going down the barrel. Instead, you're going to take this lever, you can see at the bottom, you're going to pull it out, like so, and that exposes your breech, a hole at the back. You're not going to pour gunpowder down there. You're no longer using paper cartridges. Instead, we take a brass cartridge. When you think of a bullet, you probably think of something like that. Is that right? So that's cartridge. Think of something like this, but fatter. All right? Much, much bigger. You take a big fat cartridge, you push it into the breech, close up the breech, aim, bang, one shot. You pull the lever down. That ejects the empty brass casing. Put a new one in, aim, bang, eject, new one, aim, bang, eject, new one, aim, bang. Simple as that. Already you can see it's faster. Now if you're aiming this, the British expect you to get a rate of fire of 12 to 15 aimed shots a minute. All right? You can fire quicker than that, but if you want to hit your target, you want to slow it down. Effective at about 800 yards, but that increased rate of fire really makes a difference. Thing is though, this is a really light weapon, and the round it uses, because it's so big, has quite a kick to it. If you don't hold this correctly, when you fire it, there's a chance you can dislocate your shoulder or break your collarbone. It's really powerful. I've been told it's like being kicked by a donkey. Not only that, but your barrel starts to get really hot as well. Your barrel's always going to get hot because you're having little explosions inside there. But with that increased rate of fire, that barrel doesn't cool down. And as a result, some soldiers were burning their hands. So over time, the British government started to issue these leather coverings. That's to try and stop your hands from burning. Now, it's a relatively good weapon. Like I say, it's not perfect because it can do you some harm if you're using it. The big problem with weapons like this is the fact we're still using gunpowder. You see, gunpowder is a really messy substance. It leaves behind thick, sticky black residue down your barrel, so it's a pain to clean, but it also obscures your view. Has anyone ever heard of the fog of war, for example? A few of you? Fantastic. So the fog of war refers to the literal fog created by gunpowder smoke. It obscures your vision, making it hard to see. For example, if I'm stood here and there was a gunpowder fog in front of me, I probably wouldn't be able to see that mounted knife behind you just there. That's how thick and dense that fog could be. Now, the problem people would have had is identifying friends from foe. How do you know you're shooting at the right person if they're marching towards you? You're not going to ask them, are you? You identify them by their uniform. Right? The British would wear bright red. That's how you know they're on your side, because we were wearing bright red. It's not to hide the colour of blood, it's not to make you difficult to count from a distance. It's red because it's cheap and it's bright. Wear red, you're probably British. On the flip side to that, our traditional enemies around this time, well, they're the French, aren't they? So they wear bright blue. So if you see someone wearing bright blue, they're French, so shoot them. That's in the 1800s, don't do that now. I don't recommend it. Our front of house actually wear blue, so please don't attack them. That's true for the 1800s. Now, that's fine if you all have the same problem, because neither of you would have an advantage or disadvantage over the other. But not long after the Martini Henrys being used, some of our enemies switch over from gunpowder to something called cordite. Cordite was a smokeless explosive. Basically, when they shot their weapons, loud bang, maybe a flash, but hardly any smoke. So they could see us, we could not see them. That's a problem. So we had to update our technology. Now, there is a bit of a significant gap between these two weapons, but the weapon I've got to show you really exemplifies all the changes that come next. What I've got here is the short magazine Lee Enfield Mark III Star, or the SMLE for short. This is the firearm that sees us through the First World War and some of the Second as well. It's a Bol Action firearm that uses cordite, so we're no longer using gunpowder. To load this weapon, you take this bolt, you pull it up and back, that exposes your breech, just there, and then you take a clip of 5 rounds, we call it a charger, but a clip of 5, push them all inside at once, then you take another 5, push them in as well, and those 10 rounds will sit inside this little box. That's called your magazine. A lot of people will ask, can you take the magazine out? Yes, you can. You only take that out for cleaning, though, so you only get one. Alright? So you're loading it through the breech. Once you put your rounds in, you press your bolt forward, up it down, aim, fire. Bam! One shot. Pull your bolt up and back. Eject your empty cartridge. New one moves up. Bang! 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 Etc. Alright? Now, it is quick to fire, but no more so really than this one just here. 12 to 15 aimed shots a minute. Effective, but up to 1,000 yards though, so in that respect it's a little bit better. I should point out though, that you're able to achieve higher rates of fire than the manual expects you to achieve. That makes no sense, does it really? You are expected to hit 15 shots a minute. But the British could also do something called the mad minute, a rapid firing technique. Now in 1907, Major Jesse Wallingford achieved a rate of fire of 37 aimed shots a minute. He was shooting at a 12-inch target from 275 yards away. During the First World War, German soldiers complained by being shot at by machine guns, and they hadn't been. They'd been shot at with bolt action rifles. To achieve this rate of fire, you just need to change the grip on your weapon. See, when you fire this, you're supposed to grab hold of the bolt with a clenched fist, pull it up and back, and then squeeze the trigger with your index finger. Right, that's what you're supposed to do. Probably not one-handed in the end. But if you keep hold of the bolt at all times, it looks a little rude, you're still able to reach the trigger with your middle finger. like that. Right? Now I'm going to try and replicate this rapid firing technique. I should point out that the British who were able to do it were highly trained and competent soldiers. I am not. I'm Mike at the Royal Armouries, but hopefully you'll get an idea as to what's achievable. I can see my colleagues kind of thinking, is he going to do it? What do you reckon, Dan? Am I going to do it? Maybe. Thanks for the vote of confidence. All right, let's see what happens. Shall we? All right, 3, 2, 1.
He's doing it.
I did do it, didn't I?
Yeah. Well done. Well done. That was brilliant. That was brilliant.
Thank you. Now, that's really not deserved, thank you. Because I am cheating, all right? I am not experiencing any recoil, I'm not aiming it. If I was aiming it, I can guarantee I wouldn't have hit what I was aiming at. But the British who could do this were really good at it, all right? Now, this technology lasted us until about 1957, where we eventually replaced the rifle number 4, I think it was then, for a self-loading rifle, the SLR. The self-loading basically means it's an automatic weapon. Once you've loaded it and you cock it just the once, so every time you pull the bolt back, you're cocking it. With the SLR, you cock it once and then you just squeeze the trigger and you get a shot each time. A really good, powerful weapon that was used in the Falklands campaign in Northern Ireland. We then changed that in the 80s for the SA-80, another semi-automatic weapon. The SA-80 has a terrible reputation, they kept breaking essentially, and we are about to replace it, the SA-80A2 as it stands, with the KS-1. Essentially what I'm saying is there's no end to this talk, because firearms are still changing, there is still a need for a military force in this country and elsewhere, and therefore I don't have an end. But hopefully one day you'll be able to come to a museum such as this one and someone will be able to say, this was the last firearm ever used by anybody. But that's just not today, unfortunately. Now I think it's really important to form your own opinions of these weapons because they are beautiful bits of engineering, but what they do can be terrible. And I think a great way of forming an opinion is by getting hands-on with the items themselves. I'm inviting you to come and have a look. All I'll say, if you do want to hold on to these weapons, please be careful and please treat them with respect. Basically, don't use any of the moving parts. I know you've just seen me do it, and I'm aware some of you may have had experience with firearms in the military, at shooting ranges or in video games. Even if you know what you're doing, please don't do it here today. So basically, please don't try and pull your bolts back, please don't pull the levers down, please don't play with these mechanisms here. The only exception is the matchlock musket. If you want to play with the trigger, you can. There's nothing real dangerous with this one. Everything else I'd rather you leave alone. If you want to see how it works, ask myself or my colleagues. We'll happily show it to you. Just don't do it yourself. Obviously, don't point the guns at anyone. It makes people feel weird if you do that. If you want to aim the firearm at a person, aim it at Colonel Alexander Popham. He doesn't mind because he's a painting. Right? Obviously, don't run around with the guns and don't take them past this little arena we've created. If you do, we will chase you. And if you can keep this part of the table free, it just means that myself and colleagues can get to you if you have any questions or if you need any help. I know it sounds like I'm trying to put you off. I'm really not. I want you to come up, I want you to have fun, but I want you to do it safely. So with that in mind, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your visit. Thank you very much.